MakerSnack.
Writing an iOS app in Swift to control a Raspberry Pi robot. Hello, bot builders. So I'm going to try to strike a balance between folks that are new to iOS and Swift and new to app development, but also go quickly enough so that people that have built apps before don't get bored. If you've built apps, feel free to skip ahead to the parts that are new to you. Now, the software you use to develop apps is Xcode. It's from Apple. If you haven't set up Xcode before, the first chapter in the book that I've written for my own university students is online, and that chapter's for free. And that's easy to find. Just go to my website. My last name's pronounced Gallagher, but it's spelled Gallagher, GALLAUGHER.com/Swift. Now, if you are a complete newbie, the entire course is available. It's everything that I teach my university students. It's meant to be adopted by educators at other schools as well, but it's also a great tool for independent learners. Video heavy, you'll learn to build a bunch of apps. It's just $25. If that sounds interesting, check it out. Feel free to share with others. Now, I also suggest that you sign up for a free GitHub account. That'll allow us to save different versions of our project up into the cloud. This little guy here is the Octocat. He's the GitHub mascot. Also, you're going to need a free Apple developer account. Now, you actually might have what you need in order to set that up. If you have an account that you've used on an iPhone, for iTunes, for anything you've purchased from Apple before, just go to developer.apple.com, click on Account, then click on Create Your Own Account. You might see some information in there about signing up for the Apple Developer Program. You don't have to pay to sign up for that to build apps, only if you want to submit something to the App Store. Apple also has a bunch of programs for students, so be sure to check those out as well. Now, if you need Xcode, you can go to the Mac App Store, just type in Xcode into the search box in the upper right-hand corner, download it, and it's also free. All right, let's start building our app. So I'd like you to open up Xcode, click on Create a New Xcode Project. It should say iOS Single View App, click on Next, and then for our name, we're going to call this PiBot. Now, it should be in Swift. Your default should be fine, but if team is red, select personal team from that menu. Click on Next, and I'm going to put mine right on the desktop. Make sure that you've clicked Create Git Repository. Click on Create, and we've created our project. Now, as soon as I've created my project, I'm going to quit out of Xcode with a Command Q. And the reason that I'm going to do that is we need to install some additional software in our project. Now, the additional software is going to be a library that allows us to communicate with MQTT through Swift code. We're going to do that from the terminal using CocoaPods. So Command Space to open up Spotlight, type in terminal, press enter, the terminal runs. The CocoaPods software is a dependency manager. It's going to allow us to install different software packages. Now, if you don't have CocoaPods running on your Mac and you've never done this before, open up a web browser and I want you to go to this page here. It's the Getting Started page at guides.cocoapods.org. So if you type that into any browser, you'll end up here. There's an installation video. There are a bunch of commands you can copy and paste right into the terminal step by step. So we're not going to do this. If you haven't done it, just follow the steps, then come on back and we'll get started. So with CocoaPods installed, minimize your browser, return to the terminal. First thing that we need to do is we need to change our directory from the terminal so that we are inside of our project directory. That's this main PiBot directory. So that's the first level in from the desktop in my example here. So I'm going to type in cd space, which is the command to change directory. Instead of typing in the directory, I let the Mac type it in for me. So after cd space, if I go over here, click on the blue folder icon next to PiBot, drag it over, drop it into the terminal, let go, click on the terminal and press enter. I can see that I've changed the directory. If you type ls and press enter, that'll list the directory, and you can see that there's a folder named PiBot and a file called pibot.xcproj, the same thing that you see over in your folder in the Finder. Now I'm going to type in pod init and press enter, and what this is going to do is it's going to create what's called a pod file in here. This is a file I need to edit in order to be able to install the CocoaPod. Now you can edit this file from within the terminal, but I prefer to do that within Xcode, so I'm just going to drag the pod file on top of Xcode to open it up. Now notice the target says PiBot. That's the name of our project. Otherwise, this is what a generic pod file looks like. I'm going to rearrange it a bit just so that it looks a little bit more like the pod files you're more likely to see in documentation. These things with the pound signs in front of them are comments, so I'll get rid of this comment here. I'm going to get rid of this other comment here as well. I'm going to grab Use Frameworks and I'm going to put it right under Platform. That's normally in documentation where you'll see that it is. So I'm just going to modify the file to look more consistent. I'm also going to remove the comment mark in front of platform. If I don't remove that, it will set the minimum required platform for our app as the latest version of iOS. I usually like to roll it back a version or two unless there's a minimum version specified. Now in this space between target and end, we put in a command which tells CocoaPods which pod file or which software library to install. And we can find that by going to the page for the library that we want. And that library is called CocoaMQTT. So open up a browser, type in CocoaMQTT into the browser. One of the first links you'll see will bring you to this GitHub page. Now the software is up top. You can ignore that, but go down to the documentation and we're going to scroll down until we see this pod command. Highlight the command that says pod and then in single quotes CocoaMQTT. Copy that with Command C, return to the terminal. I've tabbed once to indent in here. I'm going to paste in this pod command, Command S to save. I'm going to quit out of Xcode, and then I type into the terminal pod space install and press enter. This is going to go through and it's going to install a bunch of files, including the entire software library. If you take a look over here in your Finder, you can see that there are a bunch of new files that are in there. Now, one very important thing to remember whenever you install CocoaPods is if you install a pod in the project, open that project up using the XC Workspace extension. XC Workspace is created as part of pod install. If you use the other extension, if you don't get in through XC Workspace, then you're going to have a bunch of errors in your project. So double click XC Workspace to launch it in Xcode. You can quit out of the terminal now. I'm just going to make Xcode a little bit bigger and we're ready to build our app. So just a few things if you've never used Xcode before. Over here on the left, you might see that your files are collapsed inside this blue project icon. If you click and expand the triangle so that it points down, you'll be able to see folders and files in there. So you typically go into the blue project file and then the yellow folder underneath. Both those have the same name as your project, and we're going to concentrate on two files for this app. One that says viewcontroller.swift, that's where all of our Swift code is going to be, and the other one that says main storyboard, that's where we graphically lay out our app with the different interface elements. Another thing to be aware of, so if your program crashes or if you quit out of the simulator, sometimes you'll get a crash and you won't see your stuff in the project navigator over here. You may be in this area here, which is the debug navigator. If you just go ahead and click on the blue folder in the far left, upper left-hand corner there, that'll bring you back to the project navigator where all your files are, and you can click on the file name that you want to return to. Now also know in the upper right-hand corner, there are these icons that indicate that you can show or hide the panes that are on either side of the Xcode environment to give yourself some more room. If you go down here, you'll also see this View As area. If you click on that, that shows up in the Interface Builder canvas when you're looking at main storyboard. That'll allow you to select the size of the phone that you're developing on. So you can go to a small one like iPhone SE, which is a good one to make sure that everything will fit on the smallest device. I typically develop on XS because that's the size of the iPhone that I currently own. So choose whichever phone you'd want just to lay the app out, and then you can pinch and zoom to resize your screen the way you want it to. Just to show you what we're going to be creating when we lay things out now, this is what our final app is going to be looking like. We've got 4 buttons in here, one for forward, backward, left, and right. These all have, instead of text for titles, they've got emojis that depict the button icons, and then we also have a 5th button down here that says connect to robot. So let's go ahead and lay this app out on the interface builder for our main storyboard file. Now, in order to put interface elements on what's called the view controller here, the view of our phone, click up here in this icon in the upper right-hand corner. It's the leftmost icon in the upper right-hand corner. It's the object library. It looks like a circle with a square in it. This will open the object library window. You can scroll through all of these different options here, but you can also use the search filter in the top of this window. I'm going to type in, start typing in BUT for button. You can see everything in here that has button in its name. There's a description of each user interface element next to its name. I'm going to click and drag this one that says button over here and just drop it on my canvas. Now, notice when I drop it, the object library goes away. You can click again for that to show up, but if you hold on the Option key when you click, that creates a window with a title bar, so it will stay. You can move it around and click on the red button when you want to dismiss it. So I'm just going to drag over another button here. I could continue to drag over all the buttons that I need, but instead what I'm going to do is I'm going to dismiss this window in the upper left, highlight one of my buttons by clicking on it on the Interface Builder canvas. Then I'm going to go up in the upper right-hand corner and I'm going to click on this downward pointing arrow. It's going to turn blue, and that's going to show what's called the Attribute Inspector. It shows all the attributes for the interface element that's selected. So it says button up here. These are all attributes that control the look and the actions associated with the button that I've highlighted. I'm going to change the title of the button that has the word button in here, and I'm going to change that to an emoji. So if I go under the Edit menu and select emojis and symbols, or you could do Control Command Space to bring up the emoji selector, I'm going to have an emoji arrow in each of my button titles for the 4 buttons that go up, down, left, and right. So if I type arrow into the search box here, it shows me not only the characters for arrow, but also all of the emojis that have arrows in them too. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select all of the arrows up, down, left, and right. And as I click on each of those, notice that these emojis are going into the title area, in the upper right-hand corner of the attributes inspector. So again, I've got all 4 of my emojis in there for up, down, left, and right. Now I'm going to go ahead and dismiss my character viewer, and then in the attribute inspector, I'm going to highlight the last 3 emojis. So the down, left, and right. I'm going to Command X to cut them out. I'm going to press Enter to change the button title to the upward emoji. And now to make this button bigger, all I need to do is resize the font here. So I'm going to click on the T to the right of font. That will bring up a little attribute area where I can go down to where it says size. I'm going to type in 64 and press Enter. My button gets larger. Then what I can do is I can press Command D to duplicate 3 times to make 3 copies of this up arrow button with all of its attributes and its current size. So I'll go ahead and do that, just moving this other button down here, which is going to be a standard button just to make a little bit more room, rearrange things. And I'll position these 4 arrow buttons in a way that looks like a robot control. Then as I click on each of these different arrow buttons, I can go into their respective title area and then one by one paste in the emojis that are on the clipboard into the title so that I change the buttons to the appropriate arrow direction. Now also scroll down in the attributes under the view area where you see tag. I'm going to change the tag value for each of the buttons too. So I'm going to set the tag for the down arrow to be 1, I'm going to set the left arrow to be 2, and the right arrow to be 3. And I'm going to use these 4 digits to distinguish the buttons when I write some code. You'll see that later on in the video. Next, I'll click my standard button down here and change the title from button to connect to robot. I'll stretch out my connect to robot button. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to group all of the directional buttons into stack views. So stack views will allow me to keep these interface elements together and evenly spaced, even if they're on different sized iPhones. So I'll click on the top button, command click on the bottom button. I'm going to move my cursor down to these icons in the lower right hand corner. And this square, it looks like a rectangle with a downward pointing arrow icon. Click on that and then select stack view from this menu. And what that does is it groups these 2 buttons together in what's called a stack view. As soon as you select stack view, you'll see in the document outline hierarchy in the left-hand side, the up and down arrow buttons will disappear. They're actually inside this new thing created here called stack view. Then with the stack view selected, hold down the command key and click on the left and the right arrow. So you've got all 3 of those things selected. You can see them all selected in the document outline. And then go back down in the lower right-hand corner again and select stack view like you did before. Now all 4 buttons are in a stack view. And now with the stack view selected, you can see that in the document outline on the left. What I want you to do is to go down to the lower right-hand corner, and I want you to click this icon here that looks like a square with some lines on the side of it. It looks almost like a TIE fighter from Star Wars. If you hover your cursor over, it says Add New Constraints. Click on that, and that's going to bring up a dialog box that's going to allow us to constrain the placement and size of the stack view on the iPhone. So this topmost number here, it's 50 on my screen. That means it's going to be 50 points from the top of the area where your app begins to display on your iPhone. It's called the safe area. You can set it to whatever number you think looks good. I'm going to keep it at 50. I'm going to click that red line. If you've done this properly, it will be selected, and you'll see the button down below says Add One Constraint. I also like the width and height of my stack view as well. So I'm going to click on those 2 checkboxes. Those are going to constrain the width and height, so this will always be the size of the area that holds the button. Notice down below that the button now says Add 3 Constraints. Click on that button, and then click the icon just to the left of the Add New Constraint button. It shows 2 rectangles aligned to the left. This is going to allow you to align whatever is selected. We want to click horizontally in container. That's just going to make sure that the stack view is centered horizontally. Now click the Add One Constraint button. You should see the stack view is aligned now in the center, and any red lines that were around the stack view are going to go away. That just indicates that everything is aligned properly. Next, let's set up similar constraints on our Connect to Robot button. So click that, then go in the lower right-hand corner, click on Add New Constraints. Why don't we keep the width and height there if you like how your button looks. Click on the top constraint to make sure that there's a good number in there. I'm going to change mine to 40. So with the top red line, width and height selected, the button should read Add 3 Constraints. Click that button. Now click on the Align button just to the left of the Add New Constraints button. Click Center Horizontally in Container. Click Add One Constraint. The button will be aligned, our interface is all laid out, and our constraints are set. And if you want to verify how that's going to lay out, you can click on View As to expose the different iPhone sizes. Click on a small one, click on a big one. Everything looks good. I'm going to go back to the iPhone 10 size, and I'm going to click on View As to hide the iPhone sizes in the bottom of my screen. Now what I need to do is I need to connect the buttons that I drew in my user interface to my Swift code. Now your Swift code is going to be inside of viewController.swift, so click on that, and then to get that to show side by side with my main storyboard, I'm going to hold down the Option key on my keyboard, and I'm going to click on main storyboard as well. Now this puts these files side by side in what's called the Assistant Editor mode. Now I'm going to click in the upper right hand corner here to get rid of the utility pane where the attribute inspector is, just to give myself a little bit more room. Then I'm going to click my Connect to Robot button, make sure that that's clicked so you can see it highlighted in the document outline, and I'm going to Control drag, hold down the Control key, drag over. You can see this little rubber band extends over. I'm going to let it go at the bottom of my code, just before the last curly brace. This box pops up, and what this is going to do is allow me to set up an interface builder or an IB action that just creates a connection from an interface builder item, or button in this case, to our code. Now I want you to select down here where it says type any, select UI button there because we're connecting it to a button. Touch up inside is the standard event that you would use for a button. And you can see this next time you use your iPhone. The standard behavior is the button doesn't fire until you lift your finger from that button. So we'll keep this the way that it is. We're going to change the name here. We're going to give it a name. We'll use lower camel case, which is the standard in Swift. So we'll say connect and then capital B for button, capital P for pressed. And once you click on the connect button, you can see that Xcode has written a function in here. The name of the function is connect button press. That was the name we just gave it. The IB action means it's an action associated with an interface builder item. And eventually between the two curly braces in that function is where I will put in the code to connect my app to my robot. Now, I also need to create some actions that are associated with the 4 buttons that I've got here for up, down, left, and right. And our behavior is going to be a little bit non-standard for iOS applications. Each button is going to act sort of like a gas pedal. When we push our finger down on one of the buttons, our robot will continue to move. And it's not until we lift our finger off of the button that the robot will stop. So I'm going to create 2 functions down here, one which fires on button down, the other which will fire when the finger comes off of the button, button up, and we'll attach all 4 directional buttons to these 2 functions. So let's click and then Control drag from the up button into our code, and why don't you let go of the rubber band just above the connect button pressed. Now let's name this function button down. We'll select the type so that it's UI button, and then for the event we're going to change this. We're going to put a touch down in here so that this function fires whenever the button is pressed down. So from the event menu, select touch down, then click on the connect button. The outline of the button down function is written. If you move your cursor on top of the circle just to the left of IB action func button down, you'll see that over on the right in our interface builder, that shows that there is a connection between this line or this function and the up button on our interface builder. Now what we're going to do is we're going to connect this function to the other 3 buttons as well. Now this is how you do that. Move your cursor to the little yellow ball that's just above the image of the iPhone where we lay out our user interface. Right click on this and what you'll see is a connection dialog box. This shows all the connections between user interface elements and our viewController.swift code. So now take a look at this highlighted area that says Received Actions. You see button down there. That's the name of the function that we just wrote. You see just to the right of that, there is the up arrow icon. That's actually showing us the name of the button. And then you see touch down there as well. That's the event which is associated with this button. And what we're going to do is we're going to move our cursor on top of the filled in ball that's just to the right of where it says touch down. We're going to click there, not control click, but just click. And we're going to drag, and we'll start with the down arrow button. So let go on top of that. And then you get a selection here of different events. I want you to select touch down, the same event. And we can see that under Received Actions, we have the down button that has a touchdown event associated with the button down function. So now do the same thing, drag from that little ball up to the left button, select touchdown, and drag from the ball again to the right button, select touchdown one more time, and we've associated all 4 of these buttons with touchdown events, which means that when the user touches down on any of these buttons, the button down function is going to fire. So now close this black connection dialog box, and we're going to give ourselves a little bit of space below the button down function, and this is where we're going to create a button up function. So let's control drag from from the up-facing button, let go just below button down. Our dialog box will pop up. The connection should read action. Name the function button up. For type, select UI button. And for event, we're going to keep it as touch up inside, which means that the button up function is going to fire whenever we lift our finger off of the button inside the button. So now click connect. We'll see that the outline of the button up function is written. Right click on the yellow ball to get the connection dialog box to show up. We're not going to use this next, but I want you to see what's going to happen in there. Now, I've moved my cursor over this little filled in circle, which is just to the left of the IB action for the button up function we just wrote. And what we're going to do is we're going to click and drag, not control drag, but just click and drag and let go on top of the down facing button. Now, what's going to happen, you can actually see in the connection dialog, this will add a touch up inside event attached to that down pointing button. Now, it didn't ask us which event to use because touch up inside is the default event that it'll put in if you drag from the ball that's on the Swift code into a button on the interface builder. So let's continue to make the connections. Click and drag from that filled in circle to the left of the IB action. Let go in the left button, in the right button. We've got to stretch out the dialog box here, but we can see that touch up inside events have been added to the left and right buttons for the button up function. Now, it might not occur to you to do this, but we also want to add a touch up outside event. That essentially would be the situation that would occur if you pressed down on the button, your robot started to move, and if you dragged your thumb outside of the outline of the button but then lifted it up. If we didn't add this, there would be the chance that if the user moved her finger off of one of the buttons and lifted it up outside, the robot would keep moving and it wouldn't stop. So add touch up outside the same way we had done the touch down in the button down function above. Just click inside of this little circle here, drag into each of the 4 buttons, select touch up outside as your event, and you'll see for each one a touch up outside event is added for that button underneath the button up function. I'll speed up making these connections, but if you move the cursor over top of each of these events, you can see that over on the interface builder, the different buttons are being highlighted, and that just confirms that the button up function is linked to each of these buttons for 2 events that could occur. Now I'm going to click on the little X in the upper right hand corner of the interface builder. That's going to get rid of that window so that I'm just looking at my code. And I'm going to give myself a little bit of space below the class definition up here, and I'm going to code a variable in here that I'm going to call direction. And that's going to be a dictionary. On the left-hand side of the dictionary are the keys, and those represent the tags in our 4 direction buttons. And on the right-hand side are the values, and those are the strings that we're going to send to the robot over MQTT. So we've got 4 key value pairs in the dictionary for the 4 directions. And just to remind you, if we go over and take a look at the Python code that we'd written, remember the control-pybot.py program, we've got those 4 strings in here: forward, backward, left, and right. Now there's also a stop message in here, but since there's not a stop button, we won't put it as part of the dictionary because there's no tag for it. We'll just create a separate stop variable. I'm also going to put some test code in here. In button down, I'm going to print out a message that just says sending message, and then it should print out the appropriate message for whichever button is clicked. That's if my tags are working properly. And then if button up is selected, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to say sending message stop. Now just a couple of Swifty things in here. If you're not familiar with the syntax, the backslash, open parenthesis, and close parenthesis is for string interpolation. Any value or expression we put in there can be turned into a string, and that syntax is inside of the set of double quotes for our string. The sender is the button that the user has clicked on. So when we say sender.tag, we're getting the tag for that button. The exclamation point is because Swift is a type-safe language, and since it's theoretically possible to put in a key that doesn't exist in a dictionary and that would return nil, Swift requires us to acknowledge that. And this is part of the concept called optionals. It's really a topic for another lesson. By the way, I could have hard-coded the strings in here, but this code is a little bit more elegant. If I add more buttons with more functions, I just have to update my direction here as well as my main storyboard, and I'll try that out in a later video when I mount a speaker on the bot and add buttons in the app to play sounds. So now let's go up here and click on this play button. That's going to build and run, and in my code, it's actually going to crash. Now the reason why it's going to crash is the authors of Cocoa MQTT have not yet updated their software library to work with Swift 4. Now I'll show you how to make these easy changes, but if your app doesn't crash at this point, great, you can just advance the video. Now when your app crashes, you move from the project navigator to the debug navigator. Now in the pane on the left, I've highlighted this line that says run loop mode has been renamed runloop.mode. So I'm going to click right here. That's going to bring up the offending code, and if I click on the little red ball, Xcode is actually going to make a recommendation and offer to fix the problem. This is a good suggestion by Xcode, so I'm going to click fix. If prompted to unlock the file, just click unlock. Now, the next recommendation, if you click on the ball there, Xcode will offer to replace default run loop mode with something else. That is actually a bad recommendation. So what you should do here instead is to backspace over the last part of this offending statement here. So default run loop mode should be turned into just default. And with that done, we've fixed everything in our library. So let's go ahead and click back on the project library icon, the little folder here. Let's click on viewcontroller.swift and we'll code up the MQTT piece of our app so that our app can communicate with our PyBot. So in order to do that, right under the import UI kit statement, we're going to press enter. We're going to type in import Cocoa MQTT. That will add the library so that it can be used by this Swift code here. Then underneath our direction variable, I'm going to put in a constant. I'm going to type in let MQTT client equal, and then I'm going to create an object of this class type Cocoa MQTT. When I type in open parenthesis, code completion is going to make two suggestions. I'm going to select the second one with client ID, host, and port. It's going to ask me for a client ID. That's going to be a string. So in between double quotes, I'm going to put in PyBot app, capitalizing the words. For the host, I'm eventually going to put my IP address in there, and I'm going to show you how you can find that for your PyBot. And the typical port is 1883. We haven't changed that, so we'll keep that there as well. Now, to get the IP address, I'm going to do command space to open up Spotlight. I'm going to type in terminal, press enter to launch terminal. I'm going to log into my PyBot using SSH space pi at pybot.local. Once you've logged in, type in ifconfig, press enter, then scan the output for this line that says WLAN 0. You'll see this if you're on a Wi-Fi network. Underneath WLAN 0 is something that says iNet, and right next to iNet should be your IP address on your Wi-Fi network. That's going to be 4 digits separated by 3 periods. Highlight that, copy it, do a command C. I'm going to go back into Xcode. I'm going to paste this in between the double quotes where my IP address goes. That's the host. And now that we have a Cocoa MQTT object called MQTT client, we can use that in our code. So let's go down here first to connect button pressed. And in here, we're going to say MQTT client.connect open and close parenthesis. And that's all we need to do in order to connect to the broker on our Raspberry Pi. I'm just going to get rid of this generic green comment that's inside of view did load. I don't need that. Then I'm going to move down here into our button down function. And in here, underneath the print statement, I'm going to type in MQTT dot, and then code completion should offer you an option for if you start to type in PUB publish. And the option we're going to choose is the one that says publish topic with string. Now, our topic is in between the double quotes. It's lowercase pybot / move. That's what we used in our Python program. And then with string is going to come from this direction dictionary value. So you can just highlight actually this whole thing from direction through the exclamation point, copy it with a command C, then highlight the word string here, just paste over that. So as long as you've got direction through the exclamation point, we're good. Then highlight this whole line that says MQTT client.publish. Paste it down here in button up. Button up executes when you lift your thumb. That should always stop your bot. So we're going to highlight the direction in there and we're going to change it to our constant stop. There's no reason why we couldn't have put just the literal string in quote stop in here. Now you can click the play button in the upper left-hand corner to build and run. I'm actually going to select in this menu that I've highlighted here where it says John's iPhone 10. And that's my personal iPhone. It's going to build and run the app on my iPhone. If you've never done that before, you want to search online to find out how you can launch Xcode projects on your phone. There's just a little bit of configuration there, but right now you can do it in the simulator if you want. It'll take a little while for the simulator or the app to run on your phone. Now, if you happen to see this message in here, which gives you an error, it says could not build module Cocoa MQTT. You can ignore that. Take a look at the top and you should see a progress bar moving over. It's just going to ignore that error and it's going to go ahead and build. This shows up sometimes for certain CocoaPods. As long as it goes ahead and builds, that error is going to go away. It's not going to disrupt the execution of your app. So I've got a build succeeded. I'm going to shift over here and show you the video of the bot working. So with your Pi on, press the connect button on your app. You'll get some messages. Then I'm going to press forward. I release, it stops. Backward, release, it stops. Right, release it stops. Left, release it stops. And sweet Johnny Ive, my friend, you just built an app that controls a Raspberry Pi robot. Congratulations! Now, there are a few more things that we should do here. We've hard-coded an IP address. It's a little bit more programming to identify the IP address for the bot. Just make sure that you know if you bring it over to another Wi-Fi network, you're going to have to find the IP address. You can do that with the ifconfig that we showed earlier. Also know if you try to do this at school or work, your network administrator might not let you log in until they get the MAC address, especially if the network has user ID and password authentication. So speak with your network admin. Everybody that did this from home, hopefully you got it to work okay. Also, if you download the project in GitHub, you'll see in here, it's the folder that says iOS. There's something that says appicon.appiconset. That is an icon set so that the icon will show up on any iPhone that it's installed in. If you've never done this before, open up your project, click on where it says assets.xc assets, then click on the app icon selection there, backspace over to delete it, then return to the Finder, grab this app icon folder, drag it into Xcode, into this pane here, and let it go. That will put these icons in your assets catalog, which is where those things should be stored. There may be just a couple of images that aren't in there. This is just the goofy icon that I've got. There are a bunch of free websites out there, including Make App Icon, that will take any image file and will create a whole folder of app icons. Subscribe to the channel, and my TAs regularly take a look on Twitter for the hashtag iOS Code Crush. So if you take a video of your bot moving or some other projects that you're working on that you learned from my videos, post that online with that hashtag. Each week, my teaching assistants will choose an iOS Code Crush poster at random that will receive a My Mac Builds Apps laptop sticker. I hope you enjoyed the video series, Bot Builders. Share with others, look for more content, keep at it, and congratulations!